Join us live tonight on Third Phase of Moon Radio.
1,000 years, 100 years, 10 years, or one. How many think it's 1,000?
Mr. Friedman, it looks like we got Blake Cousins, the Third Phase of Moon, the guy who's responsible. We're working real hard with his brother to broadcast the information to the world that he just got on, and you'd like to join in on this conversation and ask you some great questions.
Sure.
Blake, are you out there? You here live on radio, Revolution Radio?
I'm right here, John, Dr. John Elias. This is absolutely fascinated, and we love to have Stanton T. Friedman on the show. He is a wealth of information. I want to ask you, Stanton, what about the universe is huge. We just found out it's 80 million years older than we expected from the Big Bang. So, we got to get to planets, and we got to get there fast. Maybe propulsion might not be the way. Maybe it is the way. What do you believe? What do you think about folding space?
Well, it's a nice idea. I tell people, take a sheet of paper, and you're a fly. You want to get from one corner to the diagonally opposite corner. You crawl across, shortest distance between 2 points, a straight line. If you could get somebody to fold the paper corner to corner, gee, you'd get there in an awful hurry. But I don't know how to do that, and propulsion works fine. The answer to my question was it only takes 1 year at 1 g to get close to the speed of light. And people want half an Einstein. Speed of light's the limit. Oh, I forgot. I don't want to tell you that as you get close to the speed of light, time slows down for things moving that fast. So at 99.9% of the speed of light, and the particles in that big accelerator go 99.9999% of the speed of light, but at a mere 99.9% of the speed of light, you can go 37 light years distance in 6 months. Pilot time. Pilot time. You go out, come back, marry your granddaughter's best friend, and so forth. That's reality. So propulsion, I worked on a fusion propulsion scheme back in 1961. And it allows you to kick particles out the back end of a rocket that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket. 10 million times as much. And that's what we know already with less than 200 years of technology behind us. I'm not saying we won't be able to full warp space and time, all that stuff. But I'm saying we already know how to do it with propulsion systems. And the people who say it can't be done don't know anything about those advanced systems. It's really crazy. They're speaking out when total ignorance.
Do you think it's wise for the U.S. to step aside and let private enterprise, for the space race? What if China were to send a man to Mars, claim it as their own, and call it the Red Planet of China? Would that be possible, and could they claim it as their own once they stuck their Chinese flag onto the land of Mars?
There have been international conventions about, the moon doesn't belong to anybody, and I presume that holds for other planets. I think getting the private industry involved would be a good idea, because as I look around, look at computers. If the government were doing it, you'd have your choice of 4. They'd all be 1,000 times less good than our present ones. They'd all cost a lot of money, and everybody would be happy, but I wouldn't be. The right to fail is an important part of capitalism, and you can see it. You need a nudge. You need an excuse for working harder, to do better, to do differently. And I would like to see private industry involved. And they're getting there slowly. Branson and Bigelow and the other guys. I think they can add a great deal to the subject. What bothers me, frankly, I worked on the space program. And all of us who were working there back in the 60s thought that we would have a base on the moon by now, that we would have gone to Mars by now. We haven't, because there hasn't been any leadership. The nuclear Navy had Admiral Rickover, who decided, that's where we're going, folks. You don't want to go there, get off the ship. And we have nuclear submarines. We have nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Because there was leadership. NASA hasn't had a goal since Kennedy enunciated one of getting a man to the moon and back by the end of the decade. Incidentally, there's a good example of how progress comes from doing things differently. A Canadian astronomer in 1941 calculated the required initial launch weight of a rocket able to get a man to the moon and back, because the science fiction writers were talking about going to the moon, and he thought that's absurd. So he did the calculations, published a paper. It would have to weigh, at launch, 1 million tons. he made every possible stupid assumption about how you go about doing it. He assumed a single-stage rocket, a limit of 1G acceleration, and a whole bunch of other things. Our Apollo, the Saturn V, which took us to the moon, weighed all of 3,000 tons at orbit. So if you make stupid assumptions, you can go from 3,000 to a million. There is no need for us to make stupid assumptions. Let's do it right, guys. But the leadership, I worked on several programs that desperately needed a rickover, and that didn't have them, and the programs got canceled. Takes guts.
As far as the government's concerned about telling the public what they're up to, do you think if they had a base on Mars or the moon, for that matter, would they tell us? And should we trust the government for everything that they tell us?
No, we shouldn't, of course, because we have many examples of where they didn't tell us the truth. I don't know that we have a base on the moon or Mars. I can't say it's impossible. It would be a tremendous undertaking, cost a lot of money, take a lot of leadership, and that's where I'm dubious. Is, do we have anybody who's got enough leadership to do such a thing in private? Quietly, in secret. And I don't want the government to tell us everything it knows about everything. I don't think that's appropriate.
And have you ever considered just moving to the United States, getting your United States citizenship, and run for president of the United States?
Hey, I was born in the United States. I'm still an American citizen. I'm also a citizen of Canada. I'm a dual citizen. I only did that after the U.S. changed the law. It used to be that if you took anybody else's citizenship, you'd lose your American. And since I was earning most of my living in the United States, and if you're not a citizen, going back and forth across the border is a real pain and all that. But somebody took the U.S. government to court, good example here, and won. And so they changed it so that now the only way you can lose your American citizenship is if you, A, publicly renounce it, and B, fight in somebody else's army against the United States, which is being a traitor. And I haven't done either of those. So when I go to the United States, I'm an American. When I come home, I'm a Canadian. When I go overseas, I'm a Canadian, because they don't talk about ugly Canadians. We're not afraid to anybody.
So we got to get you on the ballot for the next presidential race, I think.
I agree.
I'm 78. I think that's a little old.
There's no discrimination here. It's all about the brain and the. I think. Look, Stanton, if there was a spaceship right now that could go light speed, we could get to Mars very quickly and some of these outer planets in our solar system. Would you be the first on board to get on that ship and start exploring the universe and our galaxy?
I'd probably have to pass a number of tests that I couldn't pass physiologically and so forth. And it's no big deal. I mean, if you want to spend the money, getting to the planets is not a big deal. It costs money and effort, and people, these things don't happen easily. That's why I mentioned that when we were working on nuclear airplanes, we employed 3,500 people. We spent $100 million in 1958, which was a lot of money. And we are not flying nuclear airplanes around, as far as I can tell. So, we can get to the stars. It's a question of having purpose and drive and reason. The Apollo program didn't come cheap either, but we did it. The nuclear navy wasn't cheap. It was worthwhile.
When you talk about nuclear airplanes, can you describe to us what they look like? Is it kind of like, can we imagine an aircraft carrier the size of these large ships on the ocean being up in the skies?
No, you don't need that. You take a regular airplane, and instead of burning jet fuel to make hot gas, which you put out through the turbine, you put it out the back, the plane goes forward, you get thrust from, Newton's law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. There were two different approaches, one by General Electric and one by Pratt Whitney. In one, the General Electric, you would run air through a reactor, run it through the compressor into the reactor to get heated to about 1,800 degrees, and exhaust it through the turbine, and you got a jet engine going. And you have two of these, and the airplane will run for years. Kind of neat. Unlimited range, you might say. there was a nuclear ramjet that was worked on. Of course, its only purpose would be to deliver nuclear bombs. They're not to be launched on board a B-52, and it could fly anywhere. So the fact that you don't need to burn fuel, something which you throw away basically, is an enormous advantage. It's just like, can you imagine operating an aircraft carrier for 20 years without refueling? That's incredible, but it's true. We do it. It took some money. It took great leadership from Admiral Rickover, but we do it.
With threats around the world and nuclear, energy being created, and even threats from North Korea, and the U.S., response saying, "Oh, we're going to step up our missile defense system." Do you think that's wise, or should we just take action right now?
I'm not going to play a politician on this. My thing is action first, talk later, but that's an old-fashioned viewpoint. Look, if the planet wanted to, we could do all kinds of good things that we're not doing for the people on the planet. And I'm not going to try to second-guess all the politicians, although they need it, frankly. But, and I think we'll see. England, for example, has decided, I guess we better build another nuclear power reactor. For those who think solar and wind will do the job, incidentally, it ain't the case. It's very expensive, and I hate to say this, but the wind doesn't blow all the time. The sun doesn't shine all the time. So you need a backup system that does work, and so it gets very expensive to have the backup and the other means of doing things.
Do you think it'll ever be possible to build nuclear reactors without the hazard of, radiation,
Well, a nuclear reactor, by definition, the fission process produces neutrons and gamma rays, which are a pain in the butt. You got to do something about them. So, if you burn gasoline, you have a noxious exhaust. It's the price you pay. Everything has its, its negatives, if you will. When you got horses in New York, they hired an awful lot of people to clean up the streets from the residue from the horses. Good sense will prevail, and nuclear's got a damn good record, incidentally. And, one of the amazing things about the Apollo program is that having 3 guys get killed in an accident didn't stop the program. It takes courage. You don't always win, but you want to move forward. That's where leadership comes in. In spite of the difficulties, in spite of the unexpected, we move onward. That's supposed to be the American way, but it hasn't looked like it over the last several years.
What do you think is going to be the future of the whole UFO situation and the cover-up? I mean, the cover-up can't go on forever.
Well, it probably can. I think the biggest part of the future will be when the press will get off its butt and start recognizing they've got a story here. If major newspapers, for example, would seek out reports that are more than, let's say, 25 years old from former military people, they'd be flooded if they'd guarantee anonymity or protection. Why can't the government grant amnesty in advance? They say there's nothing to flying saucers. Fine. Let's say you will not punish anybody for telling about the experience he had while in the military more than 25 years ago. And that's a challenge. How about it, government? You say there's nothing to it? Show us.
I agree with that. That I'm sure people have died. There's been speculation that James Forrestal, one of the first Majestic 12 members, was killed, and there's also speculation that other people have died trying to keep this a secret. So I think you're right. There needs to be amnesty for those to come out, and there was actually some other member. I think Bob Dean and also Jim Sparks also said that as well. That needs basically what needs to happen to get those people out there. Now I want to ask you another question. What do you think all the listeners that are seeing this, or hearing this, and all the viewers that will eventually be seeing this down the line of Third Phase Moon, what do you think we all can do to get this going, aside from the citizens hearing order that's happening? What can we do to push it?
Well, you can talk to the talk show hosts. You can talk to the local newspapers. And I was doing a radio show out of Seattle, and a woman said, I haven't heard, I'm sure there aren't many sightings around here. I said, I'll tell you what, if you ask your audience to call in with their sightings, I'll bet you'll be swamped with reports. I don't think so, she said. Well, try it. The rest of the program, she was swamped with reports. So it's overcoming the notion that nobody cares, that nothing's happening, there's no data. Put it to the trial. It's just like America's Most Wanted. What are the chances of catching that criminal? Well, small, but they caught an awful lot. If you got enough people looking, cast a big enough net, in other words. And I think that's what we need to do, an organized effort that says, hey, tell us, we'll listen. We won't reveal your name. I had a case in California, get a call on a Monday about something they'd seen Sunday over Los Angeles at 9 o'clock in the evening in March. This is when I lived out there more than 30 years ago. Got a call the next night. They'd gotten my name from my number from the Griffith Observatory. Somebody else, when I looked at the map, they'd obviously seen the same bright red light over the city of Los Angeles. So I called the local paper, got them to run an article in which I gave my address, my phone number, said I wouldn't use names without permission. I'd sure like to hear from anybody else who might have seen something. And I didn't give a lot of details about what the people reported. I heard from 30 different people. Many of them had tried to report it to the cops. What are you drinking, lady? Was the response in one case.
Oh, of course.
And fortunately, one person had binoculars and saw that it was a candle in a cleaning bag, a plastic balloon, if you will. Another saw it land on the Wilshire Country Club lawn, and I talked to the fire chief, and he wasn't about to go public because every kid in the neighborhood was going to try to duplicate that. Nobody gave wild discussions about what was going on. It was a great test of the fact that people are pretty good observers. They can't always interpret what they see. If you seek the information and provide a safe climate, like the cops saying, we want to hear... I asked the RCMP here in Canada. I said, when you put out a big noise about you'd really like to find out more about some terrible event that happened, any witnesses and so forth, please call, etc. I said, do you get a lot of response? And the RCMP guy said, we get tons. What percentage is useful? Well, 3 or 4%, but that's how we solve most crimes. So you got to be like the guy who wants to hire or the basketball coach who wants to get a 7-footer. Yes, most people aren't 7 feet tall. So what? Give me one. That's all. And it's the same thing here. You're not looking for every story to be true. It won't be. Not every isotope is fissionable.
We just need one.
Physicists use the ones. That's right. Use the one that is.
We just need one case. That's it. And there's thousands that can be used. And like Preston said earlier, I think we deserve the right to see the Roswell wreckage in a museum someday and be really shown all that. But like you said, that key word for everybody out there listening is one. We get the media to actually cover one story. But how are we going to get Clearwater, Clear Channel, or any of those other big things to actually listen to us and not throw in noisy negativists to try to counter everything that you say or Dr. Edgar Mitchell says? But we got to get them to get that one.
Well, that's right. Incidentally, I will be in Roswell July 5th, 6th, 7th this year is the annual festival. There'll be thousands of people there. It'll be a ball.
I've never been to the Roswell Festival, although I would love to go sometime.
But you can get there. It's a nice town, 50,000 people, warm. In the summer, it's hot, I would say.
The sad thing is the media portrays, when they just cover the costume contest, the parade, but they're not really giving it a real, with the seriousness it deserves. That's the problem.
There will be other professionals. I'll be giving, I think, 3 lectures, and there will be other scientists who will be there. And look, one of the 12 PhD theses is about how bad the press coverage is. it's time the press took up the challenge and look at itself in the mirror and say, how about playing it straight, guys? Isn't it about time? You'd be amazed what would happen.
If you were to rank the top 3 cases, what would you say are the top 3 most important cases that we can actually use to get to this?
That's like asking a mother, which of your 9 kids is your favorite? What?
That's true.
Well, the cases, obviously, I like the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, as reported in my book, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, done mostly by Betty's niece, Kathleen Martin, who had all the hypnosis tapes and so forth. It's a very well-documented case, and especially because of Dr. Benjamin Simon, the psychiatrist who did the hypnosis. If you want an expert on shell-shock war veterans, at PTSD, we call it now, post-traumatic stress disorder, that was Dr. Simon. He ran a hospital, 3,000 beds, for people with PTSD coming out of World War II. He wrote, there's an Army movie, Let There Be Light, starring Dr. Simon, how he got these people back to the living, if you will. He didn't know anything about flying saucers. He knew a very great deal about helping people recover memory of missing time, of reintegrating into their personality something that was difficult and scary and so forth that happened to them. The Roswell case is great. I like one of my favorite cases, and everybody's got their top 10, the RB-47 case. In the late 50s, a reconnaissance bomber flying over the Gulf of Mexico, a very highly trained crew of 6 members with all kinds of surveillance instrumentation. They saw a UFO. It circled around them, which is a neat trick when you're going 450 miles an hour. They picked up the object on radar. They radioed the ground. The ground picked up them and the object. This case lasted an hour. It's one of Jim McDonald's cases. And he tracked down all 6 of the military witnesses. And it's an incredible case. He even wrote an article that appeared in his scientific journal. So that's the kind of thing. Multiple witness, radar visual, long duration. It's the kind of case that the noisy negativists have real troubles with. Now, I'll admit my University of Chicago classmate, Carl Sagan, when I brought it up, oh, well, that was spoofing, Stan. That's where you create a target that isn't really there by using clever radar techniques. I said, Carl, there were visual sightings for an hour. Oh, I'll have to think about that again. The standard rule is whatever explanation you come up with is better than reality as long as it shows anything but alien. And as long as the press doesn't do its job to track down the facts, to do it right. Would you send a guy who's never seen a cricket match to cover it on national television? I don't think so. At least they can read a book or 2 or study the evidence. I'll give them a free lecture.
Speaking of national television, what if, hypothetically, CNN, ABC, all the main broadcasters were in their helicopters surrounding a flying saucer flying over New York, let's say, and this was broadcast around the world. Contact has been made. There's something in the air. We don't know what it is. Look at this craft. We're filming it. Everybody's watching it live around the world. What do you think at that moment in time, what would happen from there on after? What people would think? Would governments collapse? Would people go to war?
I don't think governments would collapse. I don't think they'd collapse. I think some religions might have a problem. The Jerry Falwells of the world, if you will, and Pat Robertsons and so forth, because they would have to admit they'd been wrong all this time, and they don't want to do that. No, I think the public can handle it. Look, after 700 lectures, I don't think I've scared anybody. I've educated them. I've stimulated them. But I haven't given them horrible thoughts. I've tried to bring a reasoning to the story. Look, we've learned to live through the nuclear age. That's pretty darn scary when you think about it. But the world didn't collapse because we had leadership who reassured us that it's okay. And to me, one of the most remarkable things of the last 65 years or so is that nuclear weapons haven't been used on people in that time. That's
Do you
really
think that it's possible? Do you think it's possible that the U.S. government might themselves pull off a grand hoax of possible being a visitation from another planet? Like put up a hologram up in the air, say this is what it is?
Yeah, the false flag notion, you get people going by putting something that isn't real and, we told you so. You suckers who believe anything. The government could do that. They'd be in great danger of being kicked out of office for doing something like that. But again, it's a question of leadership. And, there was a point in time